Hey, folks, welcome here. Thank you for joining us. Real quick, I just want to say thank you again. As always, it's great to see that people are interacting. They're joining in on discussion. We get comments, we get emails, and so it's good to see that. This is Disgruntled, of course. I am Richard, your host. Let's get straight into today. I was scouring. I can't pronounce that word very well. Scouro. I was looking on the internet for some good information, some good topics to delve into today, and I came across a article. It was written maybe a week ago, so we're a little late in the news cycle, but I thought that it was still good information. It was a good idea to maybe talk about on the show. It has to do with the legacy in which we as veterans decide to keep around. And I think that it's a great topic because we don't talk about this much. We don't talk about this as veterans in our own circles. We don't talk about this much with our friends, our coworkers. We may talk about our legacy with our loved ones, our family, our close friends, but certainly our spouses, our kids, our parents, things like that. And in my opinion, legacy is important. It really kind of tells the story of who you are or who you were when your time here is over. And I don't think it's important in the sense that you got to keep up with the Joneses, so to speak. And you, maybe for some people it is. Maybe some people want to leave this world and be popular. We want their memory to be popular or whatever you want to call it. I believe that my legacy or our legacy as veterans, as a community, is important because of what this all took. The sacrifices that were made, the things that were done to have the things that we have, and the idea that a very, very small percentage of the population of this country pitched in to secure it. And I don't think it's something where we need to make anyone else feel like shit because they didn't. As we know, the military is not for everybody. And a very wise man once told me that if everyone was a hero, meaning if everyone served in the military, who would sit on the curbs or stand on the sidewalk during the ticker tape parades when the heroes all walked by? And when I first heard that, I didn't really put two and two together. Maybe it was because I was still young up here, or I really just didn't give a shit about what was being said. But those words have always stuck with me, so they made an impact of some sort, clearly. And I don't, however, like to identify as a hero. I don't like anybody to introduce me as a hero. But as we've discussed on shows prior, it just ends up happening sometimes. And people really feel that way. People really feel like you are heroic. The things that you have done when you wore a uniform are and were heroic. And so to a certain extent, we got to just kind of accept that it is what it is type thing, and move on, say thank you, and move on with your day. Because I don't think that you're going to get a lot of people to change their mind. And in fact, if you do something out of pocket to change their mind, they're going to change their opinion of you. And I don't think we necessarily want that to be happening either. So, with that said, I think that legacy is important. So I think we should jump into this. It's not very long, but it was written by Patrick Murphy. Patrick Murphy was the first Iraqi war vet that was voted into Congress. I believe he was the ex secretary of the VA. He's done quite a few things since he got out of his military service, and so this article he wrote was really more about how post 9/11 veterans live on and can still be successful with PTSD. And so it's a pretty good article, although I think that my take on it was not necessarily the intended reaction that he was looking for. But let's go through it, and we can see what you think. So here we go. So here's the article. It is titled, and it is an opinion piece, by the way. It was put out on the 13th of June, The Post 9/11 Generation's Path to Post-Traumatic Growth. For my generation of veterans that came of age in the aftermath of terror attacks on September 11th, 2001, and subsequently fought the longest wars in American history, there's a signature injury that has impacted nearly 3 out of 10 of us. That's PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. PTSD is not just a medical diagnosis, but a poignant symbol of collective enduring struggle. While we've seen resources and treatments provided for PTSD increase, as well as a broader acceptance for those impacted by this injury, we've also seen these men and women viewed as if they're broken. Now that's a pretty interesting take. And I think that he's right. I think that a lot of people who maybe don't have a lot of experience with veterans in their circle, they're not related, they don't work with, they don't live next door to, they don't have friends that are veterans. It's kind of just this void of being, and they don't really quite understand. Of course, there's lots of war movies, there's lots of documentaries, and there's lots of places to get information, much like Disgruntled here. But you got to search it out. And so, I don't think that a lot of people maybe search it out if it's not something that is in their face, or it's not part of their being, right? It's not part of their day-to-day goings-ons, if you will. And so, I mean, you can't hold that against people by any means. So let's continue here. Veterans who embody the ethos of post-traumatic growth, the positive psychological change experienced as a result of overcoming highly challenging and stressful life situations, push back against the broken narrative. And I urge you to join Josh Goldberg, CEO of Boulder Crest, in marking June 13th on your calendar as National Post-Traumatic Growth Day. We have seen examples of post-traumatic growth throughout history where significant adversity can spark substantial progress and change. Since our nation's founding, waves of American veterans have demonstrated how they've become incredible civic assets after their military service. From George Washington to Dwight Eisenhower, John McCain, and Colin Powell, these veterans became icons of American statesmanship. And I think that what's important here is that we don't get hung up on the fact that for post-traumatic growth, in a way it sounds like he is insinuating that you must be a statesman. You must hold high offices to make change. In order to adhere to, and maybe adhere is not the right word, but in order to agree maybe with this post-traumatic growth, the level at which you achieve plays into your post-traumatic growth. And I don't know that I necessarily agree with that. And maybe that's not what he means. That's just kind of the way that I took it. But I think that it's important to understand that each person individually has their idea of what growth looks like, especially when it comes to their mental health. I know people I served with that will staunchly argue that post-traumatic stress is not a real thing. Doesn't exist. I don't have it. If you say you have it, you're weak. And I think that all plays part of the stigma. And usually those guys are a little bit older. And they were in the military for a long time, which would be before 9/11 anyway. And so maybe what he's talking about is post 9/11 veterans. That's what the title says. But I think it's hard to delineate between what the two is, because if you're a guy that joined the military in 1991 and you just missed Desert Storm and you served until 2020 or 2015 or 2012 or whatever that is, you are a post 9/11 veteran. But yet you still have all these ideas and you still have these ways of doing things that were probably post 9/11 TTPs, if you will, or just ways of doing things that were maybe more acceptable, or they were just the way things were done before 9/11. Because you got to think, after 1991 and Desert Storm was over, there wasn't a whole lot of conflict that the U.S. was involved in, that we knew about anyway. And so serving in the military, although a noble cause, wasn't the same. The effect of your service wasn't quite the same. We weren't sending 19-year-old kids to a faraway land to fight for their lives on a daily basis. We weren't sending 20-year-old kids to small outposts on mountainsides to fend for themselves for 3 months with, water and MREs and rations and an ass load of ammo and water. And although that's part of the job, that's what you train for, we weren't doing that. So folks that joined before 9/11, I'm not going to say that they had it easy, because, the military is the military. But as far as mental health conditions go and just mental health situations, it was different. I'm not going to say that it was easier or it was worse. It was just different. And then, of course, you have the generational gap, or you have the generational change, where I think as we get further along in time, the weaker our generations become. And maybe that's something that's cyclical, right? Maybe that's something that changes over time. And, maybe we'll have strong youth once again that take pride in this country and respect their elders and, just do the right thing because it's the right thing to do, and live by the golden rule and things like that. I mean, hell, I just had a buddy a few days ago who was 45 years old, stopped to help some teenager on the side of the road. They got into there wasn't even an argument from what I understand, but the kid ended up running him over. And my boy spent some time in the hospital. He's okay. But all because he stopped to help, and I'm sure my buddy, I'm sure my boy was trying to school him about how to take better care of his car, maybe, or something like that, just because that's the kind of guy he is. Like, I'm going to help you, but I'm going to explain to you how you can avoid this the next time. And apparently the youngster didn't like that, took off and ran him down. Now he sits in a jail cell. Just a young kid. So things like that. All right. let's see. Post-traumatic growth doesn't just apply to politics and public service. We also see growth in entrepreneurial spirit in veterans who started small businesses and went on to become titans of industry. Today, there are 2.5 million veteran-owned companies, exemplified by decorated Iraq War veterans like Blake Hall and Don Hafeker. And Don, if I butchered your name, I really apologize. After Hall's 2004 Vanderbilt Army ROTC commissioning, he became a rifle platoon leader and served in Iraq. Earned 2 Bronze Stars. After his Army service, he graduated from Harvard Business School and started ID.me in 2010, which ID.me is the website you use to verify your credentials for things like GovX. For example, if they offer you a military discount online, you use ID.me to verify that you actually did serve and you qualify for what they're offering. And then the Dawn Hafeker, a 2001 West Point graduate, she earned the Purple Heart and Bronze Star for her service in Iraq in 2004. Came home as an amputee and founded Hafeker and Associates 2 years later. She now runs Hafco Holdings LLC, as well as continuing to serve a nonprofit supporting veteran entrepreneurs. So these were all people that were veterans, started businesses, became very successful, and then became, as he explains, titans in their industry, in their field. And that's great. That's a great thing. Let's continue. I have thoughts about this, and I'm going to save it for when we get through this. JFK was once asked what actions led him to become a war hero, which launched his career in public service. And he responded with, "It was involuntary. They sank my boat," he said. And the author goes on to say, "My post-traumatic growth occurred in the same vein. I returned from an Iraq deployment with the 82nd Airborne Division's Falcon Brigade in 2004 with the burden of 19 paratroopers killed in action." Man. It spurred him to live life worth their sacrifice. I aimed to become the man I thought they would want me to be and live a life of meaning. I became the first Iraq war veteran elected to Congress, leading in the effort to repeal Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and serving as a co-sponsor of the post-9/11 GI Bill, which has sent 1.1 million people to college, including me. I finished my college degree on post-9/11 GI Bill. As the 32nd Undersecretary of the Army, I pushed for policies to reduce stigma for seeking help, resulting in the addition of embedded behavioral teams at the battalion level. I want to talk about this because it is true that, well, it's true that Don't Ask, Don't Tell went away. And whatever, right? It is what it is. Before Don't Ask, Don't Tell went away, I served with many gay people. I didn't give a shit. Nobody else gave a shit. They weren't overly flamboyant. They didn't throw it out in everyone's face. Everyone just kind of knew. But they grabbed a beer out of the same cooler we did at the end of the day. We were a team. We were a family. Nobody cared. And then it went away and nothing changed. All these people were still gay. They were still the same people, and they still drank the same beer out of the same cooler, and they still performed their job just as well, or for some people, not as well as they were supposed to. And performing your job, good or bad, had nothing to do with who you chose to sleep with that night and whether or not you're gay. None of that mattered. But this idea of reducing the stigma for seeking help for mental health disorders. It is true that at one point it was told to us as a unit. I can remember it not almost verbatim, but pretty vividly. I remember them saying, "Listen, guys, if you have a problem, it's okay. We now have resources to help you. Nobody's going to judge you. Your career won't be in jeopardy. Everything's cool. If you need something, say something. We got your back. And everyone was a little skeptical. I remember leaving that briefing, and we were all, not we all, but most of us, anyway, the smokers, were standing outside in a smoke circle, talking about the briefing we just had. And I remember people saying, well, if that's not the biggest crock of bullshit I've heard all week, then I don't know what is. And then some people were like, well, hey, maybe they're telling the truth. I mean, we did just get back. This was shortly after our brigade got home from Iraq. We did just get home from a deployment, and people were dropping out. People were having issues. There was a huge issue in our brigade with drinking and DWIs, and the divorce rate was through the roof. And so they came out and told us, it was, if you have issues, it's okay. Just let us know. We'll get you the help that you need. Don't worry about it. And there were a few people that believed them, and they did go and seek out help. They went to the unit. They went to these embedded behavioral health teams that were over down the hall of the battalion HQ. And I will say that a few of them you kind of slowly just watch disappear into the void. Now, I can't say for sure it's because they asked for help, but it sure was suspicious, if you ask me. So I don't know, and I have a sneaking suspicion that no matter what they say, no matter what you say, no matter what I say, when soldiers go to the powers that be, when they go through their chain of command to ask for help, there's still some sort of a stigma. I believe there is. I could be wrong. I've been out since 21. Although I will also say I believe that there are people in leadership positions that are looking to help their soldiers and help their soldiers get through. If there are issues that don't allow you to serve any longer, I still believe that there are people in leadership spots that are going to help you get the help that you need. Because at the end of the day, across the board, this idea of the suicide numbers and the incarceration rates, the homeless numbers amongst men and women who have wore a uniform is astronomical. And it's a complete mystery to me why for all these years there hasn't been any significant change in these numbers, in the way that these folks get assistance or housing or food, whatever the case may be. I just find it very interesting. There's a lot of money that leaves this country for foreign causes. And I don't want to beat the dead horse because we talk about it all the time. But we could solve a lot of problems with even a quarter or half of the money that we spend on places like the war in Ukraine, for example. But even that's a broken record. We all know what's going to happen there. Let's see. We were down here. One key way to experience growth after service is by stoking the fires of the post 9/11 generation's entrepreneurial spirit. This is why I've leaned on a generation of veterans who preceded me, like Alex Grosky, the former CEO of Johnson & Johnson, and Bob McDonald, the former CEO of Procter & Gamble, and the ACE Secretary of the Department of Veteran Affairs. These former soldiers and business leaders helped me achieve post-traumatic growth in the way I hope to see from others. Our generation has collectively survived the crucible of combat. Running a business is a purpose-driven mission that veterans can collectively appreciate. Now, I agree with this 1,000%. It's mission-based, right? We want to give veterans a mission, something tangible, that they know that they have a goal set out, even if they're in charge. The commander's intent, if you're a business owner, you're the commander, your intent is to grow your business. And depending on your business, there's different metrics that need to be met in order for you to be successful. And I believe that veterans strive under that type of leadership and that type of idea. I mean, still, even if you're the business owner, you're still the leader. And you're still leading yourself. You got to motivate yourself. You got to get your ass up and do the work. You got to follow through. You got to do this. You got to do that. There's all kinds of things you have to do. You have to lead yourself as well as anybody else that is involved in your business. It's just the way that it is if you're going to be successful. So putting veterans in these spots is a very good idea because the military preaches and drives into your head mission first. Mission, 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 mission. So I think that he's on to something here. Let's continue. World War II veterans came home and took part in that same mission. In the process, built the world's most iconic brands, including the largest sports apparel company, Nike, largest retailer, Walmart, and the biggest media company, Comcast. All three of those were started by veterans. In contrast, fewer than 5% of post 9/11 veterans start their own business today. But it's more than just access to capital. As post 9/11 veterans, we must define who we are and, more importantly, who we can become. Here's the best part. This is where we're hitting today. It took more than 5 decades for World War II to be defined as the greatest generation. After 2 decades of war, we can't afford to wait 5 more decades to define our generation's continued service. This generation of veterans are more likely to be employed, more likely to vote in elections, and yes, more likely to start a successful small business. The Halls and the Havokers will become the next Phil Knight or Ralph Lauren if given the chance. This begins today, the National Post-Traumatic Growth Day, as we recognize, celebrate, and properly frame post-traumatic growth. The opportunity our generation has to overcome the toughest circumstances to turn our struggle into success. Now, why is this important? And why are we talking legacy? I agree with this guy, Mr. Murphy, that we can't wait. He's right. After all these years of war, we can't wait another 5 decades to define who we are as a generation of veterans. You see, I believe that when your time in the uniform is over, you can choose. You certainly have the right to choose to fade off into the void, into the sunset. Do your thing. You've earned it. You deserve it. You also have the right to just be. Not necessarily fade into the dark, but just coincide with all of your people around you. Or you have the opportunity to make real change in your community. And you never know. If you work hard enough, if you catch that wave, or whatever that wave may be, you can be a leader in whatever industry it is that you decide to start a business in. How will the youngsters 3, 4, 5 generations from now, how will they see us? Because remember that we are at a point in this country right now where we have never been. This era, if you want to call it that, this era will go down in history, in American history, as one of the most polarizing times our country has ever seen. One of the most divisive times our country has ever seen. You better believe that our generation is going to enter that conversation, especially future generations of veterans. Much like we look at World War II veterans, and in my opinion, look at them with such respect and just how grateful I am for those people. And furthermore, how impressed I am with their tenacity. I mean, these guys were real warriors. They were fighting a war in a foreign land, yes, with less than adequate equipment. Went through winters with summer gear. They went through summers with winter gear. They went through both with no gear. They were captured as POWs. They lost a lot of their buddies. They were gone for a long, long time. And then what? And then when it was time, when the war was over, Hitler was dead, the camps were liberated, the Pacific was won, all these things. When the war was over and it was time for all those folks to come home, and they boarded planes and boarded ships and made the long journey home, what'd they do? They came home, they found their parents, or they found their wives, or they found their husbands, or they found their families, took a little time to settle in, and then went to work. And a lot of them started their own business. They found that they couldn't work for other people. They had challenges. It was hard to work alongside people that maybe hadn't served. And at that point in time, I believe it was probably difficult to work in a factory or the mines or a warehouse or whatever with a bunch of other dudes and not be with any other veterans. So in that respect, maybe it was a little bit easier to go back to work. But a lot of them started their own businesses and never talked about it. Never talked about the brothers they lost. Never talked about the destruction that they caused or saw or felt. Never talked about that mysterious scar on Grandpa's shoulder that your parents might have talked about. Yeah, my grandpa always had this weird looking scar on his shoulder. Turns out he was shot in Germany or something like that. And nobody ever knew until he died. They just didn't talk about it. They put their heads down and they went to work. And I believe that many of them suffered with their own stories, but they went to work. They raised good kids. They raised beautiful families. Some of them struggled. Some of them stumbled and fell. I mean, we could talk about Audie Murphy, right? The most decorated United States Army infantry soldier ever. Finally, before he died, came out and said that he was struggling with his mental health. He was an alcoholic. He was abusive to his wife. And he was that way for years after he became an actor, made movies about his own experiences overseas, relived them, played himself, but finally admitted that he was struggling. And if I remember right, he might have been the first celebrity to come out and say that he wasn't right. There's something wrong. But he did it. And so what are we going to do? What are we, the men and women that served in our country's longest war ever? What's the legacy that we're going to leave behind for future generations? We could certainly leave something that they could reap benefit from. We could leave a legacy behind that's motivating. We could leave a legacy behind that's shameful. And I guess that decision is on each of us individually. After all, your legacy is your legacy. But I urge you to remember that whether you like it or not, because you served, if people know that you served, your legacy will automatically be dumped in with our legacy, with our generation of veterans' legacy. And I think that we have a lot to bring to the table. After all, most of us belong to the first generation to have cell phones. My generation, my age group, is the only generation, I believe, that knows what life is like without the internet, knows what life is like without iPhone, knows what life is like without a Tesla. Our generation didn't have all that. All that stuff came very quickly. We picked it up. We learned it. But we didn't have it as kids. You know what we had when we were kids? Check this out. We had a Nintendo, Excitebike, Paperboy, Cubert, shit like that. And we played outside. Novel idea. In fact, the biggest punishment that I ever could have gotten from my mother before the age of 14 or 13, whatever it was that I couldn't go outside after school. You come home and you keep your butt in that house until I get home from work. None of this come home, give me a call, hey mom, home from school, I'm going out to play football with my friends, or we're going to just be outside riding bikes or whatever it was that we did. We didn't like being in the house. We didn't come home and instantly turn on the television or bury our nose in a phone or a tablet or a computer. We didn't have that. I remember the first time I asked my mom if we could go buy a computer and get America Online. I think I asked for 2 years before we ever got one. I think the computer was a used one I found from a buddy's dad that was getting rid of it and sold it to us for cheap. It was a huge deal. So I say all that to go around the block, to just go across the street to say, think about the legacy that we leave for the generations to come. Think about the legacy that came before us. Did we do it any justice? People like JFK said things like, it just happened. They sank my effing boat, so I chose to make my life worthy of the sacrifice of the men that died next to me. The guy became president. Some think that the government killed him. Some think there was the shooter on the grassy knoll. Whatever. I don't know. That's a whole nother show. I don't know enough about all the theories to talk intelligently about it, but the man became president, and he was loved by many people in this country. And a lot of people will say that our government all these years is fake. It's been fake. It's all a lie. None of it matters because none of it's real. Well, maybe that's true. But until we see hard, concrete evidence of that, I'm going to roll with what we got. With the understanding that there are a lot of holes in a lot of stories. And so there are things that need to be cleared up. But I don't know if I believe that Lyndon B. Johnson was the guy that actually shot Kennedy from some window and then raced to Air Force One to be sworn in as president. I don't know if I believe all that. Maybe it's true. Who knows? Anyway, just think about that. And if you're somebody watching this who's not a veteran, but you know one, or you're close to one, ask them. I challenge you to ask them about how they feel about their legacy. How do you feel about the story and the purpose that you're leaving behind? If you are a veteran, give it some thought. And also think about whether or not we as a generation did any justice to the generations before us. All those great war heroes, those great leaders, military leaders that we once had, like Stormin' Norman, for example. George Washington, of course. I've even heard somebody was telling me that the story of Hal Moore, the We Were Soldiers movie, that guy, Sergeant Major Hal Moore, that story is all fake. But let's just assume for a minute that all of it's real. The stories of the successes that we've had as a military through the years that this country's been a country, did we do it justice? If those people were to come alive and we could have one last chat with them, and we devoted 2 minutes of that chat to asking those people whether or not they believe that we, in good faith, furthered the good work that they did, would they say yes? Are we Americans, veterans or not, are we Americans that deserve their sacrifice? Those are the questions I think that we should be asking ourselves. Until next week, you guys have a great evening. We'll see you on down the road. Good night.